The morning my daughter called me crying from her car in a parking garage, I already knew what had happened. I had warned her the night before. I had looked her directly in the eyes and told her that no matter what Sandra Whitmore said or did in the coming days, she was not to breathe a single word about the $2.3 million sitting in her name. Not one word. My daughter had looked at me like I was being paranoid, the way she always did when she thought I was holding too tight. But I wasn't holding tight. I was holding strategic. When she answered my call that morning, all she could manage was, "Mom, you were right." And I sat down in my kitchen chair and felt that heavy mix of satisfaction and grief that comes from knowing the world sometimes confirms your worst suspicions about people. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 39 years old, and I have been the only constant in my daughter's life since she was 4. Her father, a man I had genuinely loved, died in a construction accident 11 years into our marriage. He fell 3 stories and never regained consciousness. My daughter was too young to hold the memory of him as a whole person. She mostly remembers his laugh and the way he smelled like cedar. I remember everything, which is both a gift and a punishment. After he died, I went back to working full-time as a registered nurse at a regional hospital in Memphis. I had worked part-time through my daughter's early years, and now I worked doubles when I could get them. My daughter was in after-school care 5 days a week. She did her homework at a table in the break room of the hospital on the days I couldn't leave. She grew up understanding that money doesn't come without effort, and she never once asked for anything I told her we couldn't afford. What she didn't know was that I had become very careful with every dollar her father had left behind in life insurance and with every dollar I earned after he was gone. I didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it the way you think about wealth. I thought about it the way a woman thinks about building a wall between her child and harm, brick by brick, quietly, without announcing anything to anyone. When my daughter was 8, I used part of the life insurance to buy a duplex 3 streets over from where we lived. I rented both units. When she was 12, I used the rental income to buy a small commercial space on a street that everyone else thought was declining. I saw something different. A coffee shop opened the following year, then a yoga studio, then a wine bar. My commercial space tripled in value before my daughter started high school. I sold it and bought 2 more. I kept living in the same house. I kept driving the same car until the air conditioning stopped working. I kept wearing scrubs to work and sensible shoes everywhere else. I told my daughter we were comfortable but not extravagant, and that was true in the way we actually lived. What I didn't tell her was that comfortable was an extreme understatement of reality. I had reasons for the silence, the same reasons I imagine most careful women have. I didn't want my daughter growing up with the kind of ease that makes a person soft. I wanted her to know how to work, how to save, how to delay gratification and still find joy in small things. I wanted her to choose her life based on what she wanted, not what she could simply buy. And honestly, I had watched too many people receive windfalls and spend them into nothing. I wasn't going to let that happen to what I had built for her. So she went to college on academic scholarships she earned on her own. She worked part-time in the campus library for spending money. She graduated with a degree in communications and got a job at a marketing firm in Nashville. She was proud of herself, and I was proud of her for being proud of herself. That mattered more to me than anything on a bank statement. She met her boyfriend at that firm. He was a project manager, 2 years older than her, from a family in Franklin, Tennessee, that considered themselves old money in a way that newer money never quite manages. His mother, Sandra Whitmore, had the particular kind of energy that comes from spending decades believing yourself superior to most rooms you walk into. She wore that belief the way other women wear perfume. It preceded her into every space. The first time I met Sandra was at a dinner my daughter's boyfriend organized so the families could get acquainted. Sandra was dressed in a way that announced itself. She had the kind of smile that landed just slightly to the side of warmth, close enough to seem genuine but far enough to make you feel it. She asked me very politely what I did for work, and when I told her I was a nurse, she nodded with that particular combination of approval and dismissal that people deploy when they want to seem charitable. She asked about my daughter's father. I told her he had passed. She offered practiced condolences and then pivoted to asking about our neighborhood in Memphis, the specific part of Memphis, and whether we were still living in the house I'd bought with my late husband. Everything about the conversation was architectural. She was building a picture, and the picture she was building placed us firmly in a category she had already decided on before we sat down. My daughter was watching me from across the table the way she had since she was small, checking my face for signals. I kept my face completely still. Sandra spent most of that dinner talking about her son's accomplishments, their family home, their connections throughout Nashville, and the kinds of events they attended. She worked in several references to what things cost, always with a light touch, always framed as casual observation. She mentioned the street name of their neighborhood 3 times in 90 minutes. I counted. Her son was different. I want to be clear about that because the story doesn't work unless you understand that he was genuinely a good person. He was attentive to my daughter in a way that wasn't performed. He asked about my work with real curiosity. He helped clear plates without being asked. He looked at my daughter the way a man looks at someone he actually sees, not someone he's decided to want. I noticed all of it. The problem was never him. It was never going to be him. Over the following months, as the relationship became serious and an engagement became inevitable, I watched Sandra operate. She would invite my daughter to lunches with her friends and spend the meal making small comments that required decoding. She'd say things like, "Isn't it wonderful how you've built yourself up from nothing?" in front of women who had been handed everything. She'd suggest my daughter might want to rethink a haircut or a dress choice before certain events, framing it as guidance. She told my daughter once that it was impressive she had managed to furnish her apartment so nicely on what she must be making. My daughter would tell me these things at night over the phone, her voice doing that particular thing it does when she's trying to decide if she's allowed to be hurt. I would listen. I would validate. I would tell her that she was allowed to feel exactly what she was feeling. And then I would lie awake afterward, cataloging every detail. When the engagement was announced at a dinner at Sandra's house, she toasted to her son finding a woman who had real ambition, said with an inflection that somehow made ambition sound like a compensatory quality, like drive was the consolation prize for lacking origin. I smiled. I raised my glass. I said nothing. The wedding was planned for the following spring. My daughter threw herself into it with genuine joy. She wanted simple and meaningful. Sandra wanted something that reflected what she called the occasion's significance, which translated into significantly more guests, a significantly more expensive venue, and significantly more opinions about floral arrangements than anyone had asked for. I let most of it happen. I covered what I could without raising questions, telling my daughter I had been saving, which was technically accurate. I told her the money came from setting aside a little each year since her father died. She accepted this. She had no reason not to. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was visiting Nashville and took my daughter to dinner, just the 2 of us, at a quiet Italian place we both liked. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and told her I needed to talk about something serious. She looked up. I told her I loved her more than I had ever loved anything in my life. I told her that everything I had done since her father died had been for her. Every late shift, every careful decision, every sacrifice that I had made looked like just normal life. I told her I needed her to listen to me completely, the way she had when she was little, and I told her something was important. She put down her fork, too. I told her that Sandra was not finished. I told her I had watched that woman long enough to know she wasn't going to simply become a gracious mother-in-law after the wedding. I had seen how she looked at my daughter when my daughter wasn't looking back. I had seen the calculations behind the social warmth. Something was coming, and I needed my daughter to be prepared. She started to defend him. I stopped her. I told her I wasn't talking about him. I knew who he was. This was about his mother, and they were not the same person. I told her what I was about to tell her was something I had been protecting her from knowing until she was ready. I had not been ready to tell her until now because now I needed her to understand it not as a gift but as armor. I told her about the properties. I told her about the investments. I told her about the trust account I had established in her name 3 years ago when the real estate portfolio had grown beyond what I had originally imagined possible. I told her the number. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, that she didn't understand. I explained again. I explained the duplex. I explained the commercial spaces. I explained the way I had reinvested every dollar of rental income for 15 years. I explained the trust, the structure of it, the protections built into it, the fact that it could not be contested or accessed by anyone other than her. I had an estate attorney in Memphis who could confirm every word. She started crying, not loudly, just the kind of tears that come when something shifts permanently in how you understand the world. She asked why I hadn't told her. I told her the same thing I had believed for 15 years. I wanted her to know her own worth before she knew her financial worth. I wanted her to build her life from her own character, not from a number, and I wanted her to meet people, including the people she would marry into, as herself, without the buffer of money changing how they treated her. I told her that buffer had now done its job. We had seen exactly who Sandra Whitmore was when she believed my daughter had nothing. My daughter sat with that for a while. Then I asked her to promise me one thing. Whatever happened in the next 2 weeks, she was not to say a single word to Sandra about any of it. Not about the properties, not about the trust, not about anything. I had a feeling we were going to need that information at the right moment, and the right moment was not yet. She promised. She kept it for 11 days. On the 12th day, 3 days before the wedding, I got a call from my daughter's fiancé. He told me, very carefully, that his mother had asked to meet with me privately. He said he didn't know what it was about, but his tone told me he suspected something. He apologized, preemptively, in the way good people apologize when they know someone they love is about to do something they can't stop. I told him it was fine. I told him I would go. Sandra's house was exactly what you would expect from someone who needed you to know what her house looked like. Grand entrance, fresh flowers that looked professionally arranged, the kind of quiet that comes from high ceilings and thick rugs. She met me at the door herself and led me to a sitting room off the main hallway. She had coffee set out. She poured it herself. We made 3 minutes of pleasant conversation before she folded her hands in her lap and shifted. She said she wanted to discuss something delicate. She said she hoped I would understand that her concern came from a place of love for her son. She said she had always believed that marriage worked best when both partners entered it with transparency, and she felt there were some areas where more transparency might be warranted. I told her to go ahead. She said that while she had great respect for what I had given my daughter, she was concerned about the long-term financial dynamics of the marriage. She said her son had built real stability, a career, investments, a future that represented years of his family's support and planning. She wanted to make sure that stability was protected. I asked what she meant by protected. She opened a folder on the coffee table. Inside were documents. She slid them toward me with 2 fingers and explained that her attorney had prepared a comprehensive prenuptial agreement that she felt it would be appropriate for my daughter to sign before the wedding. She framed it as standard practice for families in their position. She said it wasn't about mistrust, it was about clarity. I looked at the documents without touching them. Then I looked at her and asked if her son knew about this meeting. She said he was aware she was having a conversation with me. She said the details were something she preferred to handle directly, as these things were often easier between parents. I understood what that meant. She wanted the document signed before he could object. I looked at the documents more carefully. They were thorough. They excluded my daughter from any participation in the Whitmore family assets, any inheritance through her husband, any interest in the family property in Franklin. They included a clause requiring my daughter to sign over any assets acquired during the marriage in the event of a separation, with arbitration controlled entirely by a firm I had no doubt was connected to Sandra personally. I turned the last page and set it down. I told Sandra that I appreciated her directness. I told her I would talk to my daughter and that we would be in touch before the weekend. Sandra smiled with all the warmth of someone who believed they had just won something. I went to my car. I sat there for a few minutes. Then I called my attorney in Memphis. I spent the next 2 days doing the thing I had always done in hard moments. I worked the problem quietly and completely. My attorney drafted a counter-document disclosing my daughter's full financial position, properly certified and notarized. I contacted the estate manager who held the trust records. I compiled everything into a single folder, clean and organized the way I had always kept important things. I did not call my daughter. I did not want her walking into the wedding weekend carrying this. I wanted her to have those last days intact. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I took my daughter aside in the hotel where we were staying and told her what had happened at Sandra's house. I showed her the documents Sandra had tried to get me to bring her. I watched my daughter's face move through the same progression I imagine most people's faces move through when they discover someone's capacity for calculation exceeds what they had assigned to that person. Confusion first, then comprehension, then something harder. She asked if she should call off the wedding. I told her that was her decision, not mine, and I would support whatever she chose. But I asked her one question first. Did she believe in him? She said yes, without hesitation, which told me everything I needed to know. I showed her the folder I had prepared. I walked her through what it contained. I told her that when the moment came, and I believed the moment was going to come, we were going to be ready. She nodded slowly. She was not her father's daughter, built broad and loud. She was mine. She processed quietly and moved with intention when she moved. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Whitmore home. It was beautiful and entirely Sandra's production. My daughter moved through it gracefully, toasting with warmth, laughing genuinely at the right moments. She was not performing. She was simply choosing where to spend her energy. Sandra watched her throughout the evening with an expression I had cataloged before. It was the expression of someone who believes they are in possession of a secret that changes the terrain. She thought she knew something we didn't know she knew. She did not know we knew what she knew, and considerably more. The wedding itself was everything my daughter had wanted, which surprised me given how much Sandra had tried to reshape it. Somehow, through stubbornness and careful choosing of battles, my daughter had held on to the things that mattered to her. The ceremony was at a small chapel she had loved since driving past it the first year she lived in Nashville. The flowers were simple. The vows were written by them and were so honest they made half the room cry. He looked at her the same way my husband had looked at me at our wedding, like a man who could not believe his good fortune and was not pretending otherwise. I cried, "I am not ashamed of it." The reception was lovely. Sandra held court at her table and was gracious in the way she was gracious when people were watching. My daughter danced with her husband and laughed with her friends and came and squeezed my hand at one point and whispered that she was happy. I told her she deserved it. The morning after the wedding, my daughter and her husband left for their honeymoon. I was staying in Nashville for 2 more days before driving back to Memphis. I was having coffee in the hotel lobby when Sandra found me. She did not look like someone who had come for coffee. She was accompanied by her husband, a quiet man who had always seemed vaguely embarrassed by his wife's maneuvers, but never quite capable of interrupting them, and her younger sister, a woman named Carol who had Sandra's same bone structure and a fraction of Sandra's restraint. Sandra sat down across from me without being invited to sit. She asked if we could talk frankly. I told her to go ahead. She said that she had been patient, that she had tried to handle this in a way that protected everyone's dignity, but since I had not brought my daughter to sign the documents she had prepared, she needed to be direct. She said the documents needed to be signed before the honeymoon ended. She said she had an attorney ready and the matter could be handled discreetly, but it needed to happen. Her sister added, in a tone that was meant to sound reasonable, that surely I understood these things were just formalities, that no one was implying anything negative about my daughter. It was simply about protecting what the Whitmore family had built. Sandra's husband looked at the lobby carpet. I took a sip of my coffee. I said that I understood completely. I said I had actually given it a great deal of thought. I told Sandra she was right that clarity was important in a marriage, and I agreed that both parties entering a marriage should understand the full financial picture. Sandra looked satisfied. I reached into my bag and placed my folder on the table. I opened it. The first document was the trust summary, showing my daughter as sole beneficiary and the current balance. I placed it in front of Sandra. I watched her eyes find the number. The second document was the property portfolio, 3 commercial spaces and 2 residential rental units, all titled in my daughter's name as of 18 months prior, before the engagement. I placed that in front of her. The third was the property appraisals, current market valuations, certified. The fourth was a letter from my estate attorney confirming the full value of my daughter's assets, with his contact information and bar credentials at the top. I told Sandra, very calmly, that my daughter had entered this marriage with a net worth of approximately $2.3 million in independently held, legally protected assets. I told her I had spent 15 years building those assets for exactly this reason, to make sure my daughter could never be pressured, manipulated, or controlled by anyone who believed she had nothing to lose. Carol stopped looking reasonable. Sandra's husband looked up from the carpet. Sandra herself went very still in the particular way people go still when the story they have been telling themselves collides violently with a different story. She said, in a voice that had lost most of its architecture, that she didn't understand. She said she had asked questions, had done her research, had understood the situation. I told her that was the point. We had wanted her to understand the situation as she had constructed it, because how a person behaves towards someone they believe has no power tells you everything you need to know about that person's character. I told her that her son had fallen in love with my daughter when he believed she was a woman building her life on a nurse's daughter's salary and her own hard work. He had never once treated her with anything other than genuine respect. He had never made her feel lesser. He had been worth watching, and he had passed every test. His mother, on the other hand, had spent 14 months making my daughter feel like a burden being graciously accepted. She had invited her to lunches designed to diminish her. She had tried to leverage a private meeting with me to get a one-sided legal document signed behind her own son's back. I told Sandra that I wanted to be clear about something. I was not presenting these documents as a threat. I was presenting them because my daughter deserved to walk into her marriage with the truth on the table, and I wanted Sandra to know, with absolute certainty, who she had invited into her family. Sandra tried to say something about intentions, about how she had only been trying to protect her son. I told her I understood the instinct to protect your child. I had been doing it for 20 years. The difference was that protecting your child does not require you to treat another woman's child like she is something to be managed. Her husband spoke for the first time since they had sat down. His voice was quieter than I expected for a man of his size. He said that Sandra had gone too far and that he was sorry. He said it directly to me, which I noted. He did not look at his wife when he said it. Sandra sat very still for another moment. Then she closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. Not softened. Exactly. Recalibrated. She was a woman processing new information and adjusting her position, which was the most honest thing I had seen from her. She said she owed my daughter an apology. She said she understood if it wasn't accepted. I told her the apology was not mine to give or receive. That was between her and her daughter-in-law. I closed the folder and put it back in my bag. I finished my coffee. I told them I hoped the rest of their weekend was pleasant, and I meant it with perhaps 60% sincerity, which felt appropriate under the circumstances. I called my daughter that afternoon. She was in the airport waiting for their flight. I told her everything. I heard her go quiet in the way she goes quiet when she is absorbing something that confirms a suspicion she hadn't wanted to hold. She asked how Sandra had taken it. I told her Sandra had taken it the way people take it when reality outpaces the story they've been living inside. I told her that her father-in-law had apologized, which I thought was worth something. I told her the choice of what to do with all of it belonged entirely to her. She said she was going to tell her husband everything when they landed. She said she didn't want a marriage built on things he didn't know. I told her that was exactly right. He called me 2 days later from wherever they were, somewhere sunny based on the sound of it. He told me he had spoken with his mother. He told me he was sorry for what she had done and embarrassed by it. He said he wanted me to know that he did not need a document to tell him he had married well, that he had known from the first month he knew my daughter that she was someone extraordinary, and nothing about her bank account changed that understanding in any direction. I told him I believed him. He said he hoped he could earn my full trust over time. I told him he was already well on his way. The weeks and months that followed were not without tension. There is no version of this story where everything resolves cleanly and everyone moves forward unburdened. Sandra apologized to my daughter at a dinner a few weeks later. It was not the most natural apology either of us had ever witnessed, but it was real enough to work with. My daughter accepted it without warmth but with grace, which I thought was the correct amount of both. Sandra did not stop being Sandra. She still had opinions about things she had not been asked for opinions on. She still arranged family events with the confidence of someone accustomed to arranging them. But the particular quality of condescension she had directed at my daughter had disappeared. She had looked at the folder, she had done the math, and somewhere in that calculation she had found a version of respect that, while not admirable in its origin, was functional in its application. The dynamic had changed because the information had changed. I was not proud of needing money to command dignity in that room, but I was also not naive about the world. There are people who only revise their assessments of you when the revision is financially compelled. Sandra was one of those people. Understanding that didn't make her a monster. It just made her someone you kept your folder ready for. My daughter settled into her marriage with the steadiness I had always hoped she would find. She kept her job at the firm. She kept her own financial accounts. She and her husband made decisions together about property and investment with the kind of transparency that Sandra's maneuvering had, ironically, made possible. They had been forced to have a complete financial conversation earlier than most couples do, and the result was a foundation that most couples spend years trying to build. I drove back to Memphis and returned to my life, which looked from the outside very much the same as it always had. The same house, the same routines, the same practical shoes. I had started allowing myself one small indulgence that I had denied myself for years. I took a real vacation. Nothing extravagant. I drove to the Smokies for 4 days and sat on a porch and read books and ate good food and thought about nothing in particular. It was the best 4 days I had spent in longer than I could measure. I tell you this because someone in the comments of a story like mine will inevitably ask why I never did anything nice for myself. The answer is that I did, eventually, when the work was done, when my daughter was safe. Some people think that's sad. I think it's just the shape that particular love took. I have no regrets about the sequence. What I want to say, to anyone who is listening and who recognizes something in this story, is this. The silence was not weakness. The simplicity of my life was not failure. Every dollar I did not spend was a dollar I could move somewhere it would grow. Every moment I spent watching, instead of reacting, was a moment I spent learning who people actually were. Patience is a form of strategy that gets underestimated because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. I raised my daughter in a house that didn't advertise what it was. I built wealth in a way that didn't announce itself. And when the moment came that mattered, I walked into a hotel lobby with a folder and set it on a table without raising my voice, and it changed everything that needed changing. There are people in your life who are watching you and have already decided what you are. They have looked at your neighborhood, your car, your job title, your family name, and they have placed you into a category with firm walls. They behave toward you according to that category. They do not expect to be wrong. Let them be wrong. Build your walls in silence. Keep your paperwork in order. Know your value before you need to prove it to anyone. And when the time comes, and for some of us the time does come, open the folder calmly and let the numbers speak for themselves. My daughter texted me last week. She said her mother-in-law had called to ask if she could bring anything to a dinner they were hosting. It was a small thing, an ordinary thing. But for those who know how far it was from where we started, it was considerable. I wrote back and told her to let Sandra bring the dessert. Let her feel like she contributed. Let her feel like she belongs in the room. That is not generosity born from forgetting what happened. It is generosity born from knowing that holding a grudge is a way of giving someone else permanent real estate in your mind. And I have always been very selective about what I allow to occupy space I could use for something better. My daughter is happy. That is the whole story. Everything else is just the path that led to it. If you're watching this, and you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, working hard and living quietly and wondering if it will ever matter, I want you to know it matters. Every single dollar you save instead of spend. Every time you watch instead of react. Every moment you protect your child from information they're not ready to hold yet. It all compounds, the same way interest compounds, quietly and in ways that aren't visible until they suddenly are. Keep going. Keep the folder ready, and never let anyone who doesn't know your whole story decide what chapter you're in. I'll see you in the next one. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I love knowing you're out there.